Without further ado, let's give a hand to Deacon Aaron.
Taken from the lands of Ham, but I am Shem. Stolen from the halls of Africa, I am Israel. Taken from the lands of Ham, but I am Shem. Stolen from the halls of Africa, I am Israel.
All right, Shabbat Shalom. Okay, so the Gathering Christ Church, we were invited to a homegoing event last week in Savannah, Georgia at Butler Island Plantation. It's an annual event that's put on by a sister named Tiffany Young and Andrea Gibson. And we were asked to come down to present some information to hopefully connect the people from that plantation to the truth. Okay. And so one of the things that, I'm starting to notice in these days and times is that our people are feeling, having an ever increasing need to reconnect with our past. So whether it's, building family trees or getting DNA swabs just to identify what tribe or region of Africa you come from, we're seeking to fill that void that was lost in the Middle Passage in slavery. So what we're going to attempt to do today, we have a presentation titled The Nomadic and Imposed Travels of a Lost Tribe. And what we're going to attempt to do is provide some additional information for our people to consider when they're on this spiritual and ancestral journey to discover their roots. All right. So in order to achieve this, we had to go beyond the fields of Butler Plantation and beyond the shores of West Africa. All right. And we're going to go back some 1900 years to the 1st century to a Roman province called Judea. All right. So we just ask that you have an open mind, a willing ear, and consider the information that's going to be brought forth. All right, so there was a lot of things that was happening in the 1st century, and nothing more important than what was centered around the Messiah. All right, so in 1931, there was an Australian Jewish biblical scholar named Robert Eisler, who published and translated the recently discovered Josephus work titled Capture of Jerusalem. And Brother Kenny, if you can read that, please.
Khan. At that time also appeared a certain man of magic power, if it be meet to call him a man, whose name is Jesus.
So he's going to give his account or his understanding of Jesus. Now, Josephus was a historian that lived during the time of the 1st century. All right, so his work is highly credible in Christian circles. All right, go ahead.
Whom certain Greeks call a son of a god, but his disciples call the true prophet, who was supposed to have raised dead persons, and to have cured all diseases. Both his nature and his form were human.
Come on.
For he was a man of simple appearance, mature aged.
Mature age, come on.
Black skinned.
Black skinned. All right, come on.
Short growth.
Short growth.
3 cubits tall.
So he wasn't a tall man. Come on.
Hunchbacked.
Hunchback.
Protagnathous, with a long face, a long nose, eyebrows meeting above the nose, that the spectators could take fright, with scanty or curly hair, but having a line in the middle of the head after the fashion of the Nazarenes, with an undeveloped beard.
Now you can imagine when this work was discovered, it caused quite a bit of controversy. Okay. Now we're going to read. We got to take some of those off, right? Because we know that we were given the images of Caesar Borgia. This later picture here is what some artists came up with in 2001 of what they feel Christ might have looked like. And the last picture, they got the skin of bronze right, but he still looks a little too handsome, right? No woolly hair, kind of looks like Billy D. Williams a little bit. But we're going to see if Josephus' account lines up with Scripture, right? Isaiah chapter 53, verse 1. Now, Isaiah chapter 53 gives a prophetic account of Christ coming into the earth and dying for our sins. All right, come on.
This is the book of Isaiah, chapter 53, verse 1. Who hath believed our report? Into whom is the arm of the Lord revealed? For he shall grow up before him as a tender plant, and as a root out of the dry ground.
Come on.
He hath no form nor comeliness.
No comeliness. All right, come on.
And when we shall see him, there is no beauty that we should desire him.
There is no, so that was the prophecy of Christ, right? That he would have no beauty, no form of comeliness, right? So we can probably say that Josephus' account sounds a little bit more closer to what he might have looked like than what we've been told. All right, let's go to Revelations chapter 1.
This is the book of Revelations, chapter 1, verse 13. And in the midst
Actually, start at verse 1. And then jump to verse 13.
This is the book of Revelations, chapter 1, verse 1. The revelation of Yeshua HaMashiach, which the Most High gave unto him, to show his servants things which must shortly come to pass. And he sent and signified it by his angel unto his servant John.
Now jump to verse 13.
Revelations 1, verse 13. And in the midst of the 7 candlesticks, one like unto the Son of Man, clothed with a garment down to the foot, and girt about the paps.
All right, come on.
With a golden girdle. Verse 14. His head and his hairs were white like wool.
Were white like wool, right? Josephus said he had curly hair. Come on.
As white as snow. And his eyes were as a flame of fire. 15. And his feet like unto fine brass, as if they burned in a furnace.
As if it burnt in a furnace. So if you burn anything that looked like fine brass, it's going to be black. It's going to be dark, right? So that coincides with what Josephus brought out. And we know that his feet were the same color as his arms, the same color as his face. So we are by no means putting Christ's skin color above what he accomplished at the cross for all nations, okay? In fact, many of us believed and loved Christ when we knew that believed that he was a white European with blonde hair and blue eyes. Okay? So, but what matters is the truth. All right? So we're using biblical and historical sources to bring about maybe a more honest depiction of what Christ might have looked like. And so we can't necessarily consider this to be an act of reverse racism or anything like that. It's just bringing forth the truth. And as the scriptures say, the truth will set you free. All right. So this is actually an act of scholarship, not an act of anything else, as Aframer mentioned. All right. So 1st century Judea. Judea had been a Roman province since 6 AD. Tacitus, which was a senator and an historian at the time, wrote in the Annals of Imperial Rome, he wrote, Many again say that the Jews were a race of Ethiopian origin. So that's another distinguishing marker of what the Jews might have looked like at the time of Christ, right? And we know that the Ethiopians are a dark-skinned people, all right? They virtually almost look the same as us, all right? The great revolt of Jews still living in Judea led to the first Jewish-Roman war starting in 66 AD. And in 70 AD, Titus, a Roman general, surrounded Jerusalem, forbidding any entry or exit. This led to famine and ultimately the destruction of the Second Temple. And the Jews who had remained were slaughtered. Josephus, an historian during that time period, estimated that 1.1 million Jews died and another 97,000 were sold into slavery. And Brother Kenny, if you can read that, Luke chapter 21.
This is the book of Luke, chapter 21, verse 20.
So we're going to see, what did Christ have to say about these events that transpired in Jerusalem in 70 AD? All right.
And when ye shall see Jerusalem compassed with armies, then know that the desolation thereof is nigh.
So he's speaking to the Israelites. When you see Jerusalem compassed with the Roman armies, know that the desolation is coming. Come on.
Verse 21. Then let them which are in Judea flee into the mountains.
Let them flee into the mountains. Now remember this point, because we're going to go back to that, right? We're going to identify what were those mountains that they flee to. All right, come on.
And let them which are in the midst of it depart out.
So if you're in the midst of Jerusalem and you see Rome surrounded, get out of town. Go ahead.
And let not them that are in the countries enter thereinto.
If you see them, don't come back home. All right, come on.
Verse 22. For these be the days of vengeance, that all things which are written may be fulfilled.
All right. Okay, so the fall and the flight, Brother Kenny. Now I try to, every source that I use, I put in the left hand of the slide, the left-hand corner of the slide, so you can see what I'm using for these sources. All right, so Brother Kenny, if you can read that.
In the year 65 BC, the Roman armies under General Pompey captured Jerusalem. In 70 AD, General Vespasian and his son Titus put an end to the Jewish state with great slaughter. During the period of the military governors of Palestine, many outrages and atrocities were committed against the residue of the people.
All right, so that's a quote out of the book Babylon and Timbuktu by Rudolph Windsor. Go ahead.
During the period from Pompey to Julius, it has been estimated that over 1 million Jews fled into Africa.
So we have to look into the scriptures, because it tells us that Africa was always a place of refuge for our people. Whether it's during the time of Jacob and his siblings going into Egypt when there was a famine. We can fast forward to the time of Christ when Mary and Joseph had to flee into Egypt to hide from Herod, right? For the purpose of, due to the fact that they were similarly built and constructed, their features, right? Keep going.
Fleeing from Roman persecution and slavery. The slave markets were full of black Jewish slaves.
All right.
Throughout the last 2,500 years, the main factors that have contributed to social migration of the Jews were wars,
Go ahead.
religious persecution, and commerce.
So we are known as a nomadic people. We're always on the run. We're always going. The main reasons why is because of war, religious persecution, and commerce. All right, so now we're in the 2nd century, and we're going to quote out of a book called African Origins of the Major Western Religions by Dr. Ben. And Brother Kenny, if you can read that.
In North Africa, just before the period of Christianity's legal entry into Rome, there were many Hebrew tribes that are indigenous to that are of indigenous African origin.
Right. Come on.
These African Jews, as all Romanized Africans of this era, were caught in a rebellion in Cyrene during 115 CE against Roman imperialism and colonialism.
So Cyrene is on the north coast of Africa. And so when we fled out of Jerusalem in 70 AD, some of our brethren, they didn't want to give up. So they staged a rebellion against Rome, which Rome quickly squashed in 115 CE. All right, go ahead.
This rebellion also marked the beginning of a mass Jewish migration southward into Sudan or West Africa.
Keep going.
Along the way of the city of Air.
So we fled into further west and north in Africa, and also many of us fled southward. All right. And I'm going to read this point here. It says, on 17 July 180 AD, Rome executed the first martyrs of the African church. 5 women and 7 men were put to death in a single day. They were guilty of committing Christian acts against the Roman state. And this is out of the Acts of the Cilician Martyrs, AD 180. So what we'll see is that there was a continuing theme. Israelites who subscribed to Christ as the Messiah and as a fulfillment of the scriptures, they were eventually martyred, right? The non-Messianic Jews are the ones that eventually fulfilled the curses of Deuteronomy 28, but we'll get there. Okay, so dispersion. Now at this time, this is the Roman Empire during the 1st century. And you can see much of Europe is controlled, Asia Minor, they controlled Egypt, and some coastal lines of the Mediterranean here. So for safety, we had to flee out, and we ended up around Cyrene here. Rome crushed that rebellion, and then we fled northward. So if you can read that first bullet point.
The names of old Jewish communities south of the Atlas Mountains.
Now, the Atlas Mountains are in this particular area of North Africa here. Okay, go ahead.
Around the regions of modern Niger and Nigeria, many of which existed well into Renaissance times, can be found in documents in synagogue archives in Cairo.
So in 1896, there was a major discovery in a synagogue in Cairo called the Geniza documents. And it documents much of our travels, our business, and so on and so forth in the Middle Ages. And in it, it had listed Jewish communities that were in and about the Atlas Mountains. All right. So remember, Christ said, flee into the mountains. Now, he said that so we can have a place of refuge for a time. All right. Go ahead.
Arab historian Ibn Khaldun confirmed the existence of a large number of proselyte Berbers.
Now, Berbers at the time were a tribe or many tribes that were controlling this particular area of North Africa. And they became proselytes, converts into what I guess you would call Judaism, or more or less Hebrew culture. All right, keep going.
At the time of the Arab conquest of Africa, in the 7th century, the Islamization of these countries, however, did not abolish all previous beliefs.
So what happened was Islam and the Muslims started to wage war against the Jews all throughout North Africa. And that led to the trans-Saharan slave trade and so on. But it didn't totally eliminate their previous beliefs. So that's why you can find a lot of artifacts and proof showing that the Berbers practiced Judaism, right? Because they became converts due to the Jews that fled. Keep going.
Christianity was abandoned rapidly.
Now, why would Christianity be abandoned rapidly? Take a guess. Number 180 AD, they were martyred. So there was no middle ground during this time. If you look, if you practice Messianic Judaism, I guess you would call it, or what we call the truth today, you were martyred. There was no room for, believing in Christ. Okay, go ahead.
Judaism continued to exist, and from Tripolitania to Morocco, modern ethnographers and anthropologists encountered small groups whom they called Jewish Berbers. These isolated groups of Jews lived in the high mountains of North Africa into the last few decades.
Now, there's a queen of the Jewish Berbers called Kahina, and she actually led a revolt against the Arabs in the 7th century, and she was an Israelite. And when you look into some of her battle cries, she was saying the Lion of Judah and so on and so forth. So she knew exactly who she was. Read that last bullet.
The Jews of 8 Adar lived in virtual symbolisis.
Now, 8 Adar is in the Atlas Mountains up here. Go ahead.
With their Berber neighbors and enjoyed excellent relations.
So they had excellent relations with the Berber neighbors. Go ahead.
With them and a high subsistence level.
Right. So they were taken care of for a time. The Atlas Mountains was a place of refuge for our people. And I'm going to read this quote here. It says, historians believe, based on the writings of Ibn Khaldun and other evidences, that some or all of the ancient Judaized Berber tribes later adopted Christianity and afterwards Islam, because Islam had, their mission was, you either with Islam or you're done, right? And it's not clear if they are a part of the ancestry of contemporary Berber-speaking Jews. So, as you can imagine, the Berbers who are living in the areas of North Africa today and practice Judaism, they're not the same people who were there centuries ago. All right. So a lot of people may look to say, no, this is what Berbers look like today. No, they're not the same people. And historians mostly know that. Okay. So we came out 70 AD, 1.1 million strong into Africa. Some of us ended up in Cyrene in 115 AD and attempted to rebel against the Roman Empire. And then many of us fled into the Atlas Mountains and lived in harmony with the Berbers that were living in that particular area. All right, so this map actually has extreme significance, really, to why we're even here today. So we're going to go into a little bit of this history. If you can read that first bullet.
Abraham Quesquez was a 14th century Jewish cartographer from Palma, Majorca.
In Spain, come on.
He collaborated with his son, Jehuda Cresquez, and is credited with the authorship of the Catalan Atlas of 1375.
So this map right here is called the Catalan Atlas that was created in 1375. And let's read that next bullet point.
He was commissioned by the Prince John of Aragon.
Meaning he was paid by the Prince John of Aragon, come on,
to create a set of nautical charts that went beyond their current understanding of the world.
Come on.
Prior to this map, Europeans had little to no knowledge of Africa beyond the Mediterranean coast.
So before this map was created, their understanding of what they knew about Africa was limited to the Mediterranean coast. So they weren't aware of tribes and borders and so on and so forth that was south of that until this map was created. All right, and some key events happened as a result of this map. Go ahead.
The crowned black man holding a golden stick.
That's this man right here.
is identified as Mansa Musa,
How many people heard of Mansa Musa? All right, good, good.
Lord of the Negroes of Guinea, fabulous wealth.
So he's still considered today one of the wealthiest men to have ever lived due to the amount of gold and so on and so forth that he had. Keep going.
The king, we are told, is the richest and most distinguished ruler of this whole region on account of the great quantity of gold that is found in his land. Mansa Musa, who reigned over the kingdom of Mali, probably from 1312 to 1337.
So you see here, they have a gold crown on his head. He has a gold staff and a gold nugget in his hand. Now, keep in mind the Gold Coast, the Ivory Coast, the Slave Coast. All right, we're going to get onto that. So we're going to touch upon some West African kingdoms. There were three main kingdoms in West Africa. The first was Ghana, that was established arguably around 400 AD to 1200. We had the kingdom of Mali, which was from 1250 to 1400, and the Shanghai kingdom, which was around 1450 to 1600. All right, and we have a good amount of information on these kingdoms due to the Arab travelers who were actually historians and recorded a lot of the information, a lot of the things that they saw in the Middle Ages. And if you can read that first bullet.
Mahmud Qadi, a Muslim who reported, according to legends, oral traditions, and documents, recorded that there were several Jewish communities that existed in Ghana, Songhai, and later Mali empires.
All right, so, and I can't go into every source, but I listed the names here. You can search this information for yourself and see, the type of things that he described and what he saw. All right, next bullet point.
A number of ruling families in Ghana converted to Judaism. And for nearly 200 years, the kingdom of Ghana, which extended at that time far north into Western Sudan, was ruled by Jewish kings.
So that was a comment from George Lichbau, who actually worked for the American Embassy and was also an historian. And he wrote extensively on his findings of basically Jews living in the diaspora of Africa. And he relied a lot on oral traditions and so on and so forth. And this is one of the things that was some of the information that he came upon. All right, go ahead. So Jews ruled, according to his account of the oral tradition, the Ghana Empire for over 200 years. All right, go ahead.
After Ghana fell because of invading forces and internal disputes, Mali rose to greatness under the leadership of a legendary king named Sundiata, the Lion King.
Now, he was called the Lion King. All right, so we don't have a lot of information on him, but if we know, or we have understanding that Ghana was ruled by Jewish kings and that the Jews migrated west, and it's also said that Sundiata came from Yemen, that its chances are, I'm going to say he was probably an Israelite from the tribe of Judah, all right, calling himself the Lion King. But, we'll dig into that a little bit more. Go ahead.
Al-Idris, a Muslim geographer from Spain, the 12th century, wrote extensively about Black Jews in the Western Sudan.
So he's another Muslim geographer and historian who wrote eyewitness accounts of his dealings with Jews in West Africa. And remember, at this time, Europeans were not aware of, the expanse and so on and so forth of Africa beyond the Mediterranean coast. All right. They didn't get that map until 1375. Go ahead. Now, this is a result of that map being published. Read.
In 1441, for the first time, Portuguese sailors obtained gold dust from traders on the western coast of Africa.
So remember, the creator of the Catalan Atlas map lived in Portugal, actually. All right. So the Portuguese, based off of that information, showed up on the shores of West Africa in 1441 looking for gold. Let's see what else they came with. Go ahead.
The following year, Portuguese explorers returned from Africa with more gold dust
And what else?
and another cargo, 10 Africans.
10 Africans. So their discovery of gold, or not, I wouldn't say discovery, but them being able to buy gold and coming to the west coast of Africa began the genesis of the transatlantic slave trade. All right, and read that last bullet point.
In 1492, Askia Muhammad I of the Kingdom of Songhai declared that Judaism was illegal.
So he declared, Askia Muhammad, Judaism to be illegal. All right, and for it to be considered illegal, you must have had a large number of Jews in that area, but he had converted to Islam. All right, go ahead.
And that Jews must convert to Islam
Convert to Islam. Go ahead.
or go into exile.
And that was that came from Leo Africanus. He wrote a book called The Description of Africa. All right. And Dr. Ben goes on to relate that black Israelite immigrants from northern and eastern Africa merged with indigenous groups of Western Africa. They also formed the parent stock of groups such as the Ashanti, the Beni Ephraim, the Hausa. All of these groups suffered tremendous population decreases during the years when the Atlantic slave trade was in operation. Others were completely eliminated. So, and we're going to touch upon it a little bit. There were actually who they were targeting for the transatlantic slave trade and the other slave trades we'll talk about a little bit were Jews. All right. Now we're going to jump to the 15th century. If you can read that.
15th century Jew presence. The Tariq al-Fatash is a West African chronicle written in Arabic by chronicler Mahmud Qadi in the 15th century.
And this is a copy of the transcript, and underlined in red are some of the references he gave to Jews. Go ahead.
Qadi traveled throughout West Africa and gave eyewitness accounts of Israelite presence. In the Tariq al-Fatash, he mentions a colony of the Beni Israel.
A colony of Beni Israel, that's what it was called. Come on.
Living at Tendirma, the southeast of Timbuktu.
Come on.
In the place where the city of Tendirma was founded in 1496, an Israelite population had formerly lived, whose wells and tombs still remain.
Now, this is a direct quote from his writings, right? Go ahead.
These Jews who inhabited the place until the 15th century lived in agriculture and had dug wells.
And we know that that's part of our heritage, right? Digging wells, agriculture, things of those natures. There were Jews that were living there long before that place, Timbuktu, was established. All right, and there's a copy of that source right there. Now, here's an 18th century map called Negro Land in Guinea by H. Mall. And we understand, well, let's read it. There are many accounts of the flood, right, in most indigenous populations, right? We subscribe to the biblical account. Now, according to the biblical account, there were 3 sons of Noah that survived, Ham, Shem, and Japheth. And this is a definition of Ham that's given in the Compact Bible Dictionary. It says, the youngest son of Noah, probably born probably about 96 years before the flood, and one of 8 persons to live through the flood. He became the progenitor of the dark races, not the Negroes, but the Egyptians, Ethiopians, Libyans, and Canaanites. All right, so the distinction was made here that not the Negroes. So we look at the map, and this map gives a clear distinction of Negro land, right in the middle of it, right? Now, the term Africa had been in use for over 1,000 years at this particular time. Why didn't they say Africa land? Right? Why was that missed? Why was that point missed? Now, this is a bill of sale, right? It says valuable gang of young Negroes. Now, when you look at bill of sales for the quote unquote African slave trade, you never see Africans for sale. It never says African for sale. Why? Because there's a distinction between native Africans, which we read there, Ethiopians, Libyans, Canaanites, right? And a distinction made between them and Negroes, right? So this is historical proof to show that those who started to create the maps, they knew of this difference, all right? Negroes were sold into slavery, not Africans. Okay, so this is a map that was created in 1747 by Emmanuel Bowen. Bowen was a renowned geographer who worked out of London. And Negro land is again recognized within the African continent. And when you see Negro land, it's always West Africa. It's always West Africa. Now let's get a closer look at what was on this map. If we see here, outlined in blue with a little bit of red, it says the kingdom of Judah, right, which became the slave coast, right? Judah is the fourth son of Jacob, right? So there was obviously Jews living on the west coast of Africa, and they had a kingdom, okay, living in an area that was considered Negro land. All right, now here's another map made in 1794 by Bolton and Anvil, and I'm just going to highlight this. In the upper right-hand corner, it says Africa. All right. The transatlantic slave trade was a little over 200 years old. The Portuguese having been the first to ship slaves in the late 1400s. Now, let's see what changed from that previous map in 1729 to 1794. The area where the kingdom of Judah was at, the kingdom is no longer there. So we read that the areas where Jews populated at were decimated by the transatlantic slave trade. So kingdoms fell. Over to the right, it says, according to Idrisi, the land hereabouts was peopled by Jews. That was a little south of the Nile River. And a little more southward, it says wandering tribes, Jews exiled. All right, so could this have been the Jews that led to the Limba tribe? Possibly. So what replaced the kingdom of Judah? Let's see. Does this look familiar to anyone? It's called the point of no return in Africa, right? So the kingdom of Judah had fell and became exactly that, the point of no return. This was a monument that was put in place that was the last stop for slaves and before they got on the slave ships. Okay, so we're at the Atlas Mountains. There's Timbuktu right in the center. And we ended up on the west coast of Africa. They had the Kingdom of Judah and a little more southward. The blue lines represent other migrations that if we had enough time, we can go into. There's a lot of historical references to show that we migrated along those paths. Okay, so we're in the 18th century now. This is Aludo Equiano, who was born in 1745 and lived to 1797. He was of Igbo origin. He was captured as a slave between the ages of 10 and 11, and he was shipped to Barbados and later enslaved in Virginia. He purchased his own freedom on his own accord in 1767 and moved to London. All right. And he wrote a testimony called The Interesting Narrative of the Life of Ludo Equiano. All right. Now, he has some very key things to say. Brother Kenny, if you can read that.
Like the Israelites in their primitive state.
Now, before you read on, he converted to Christianity when he became a free man. Okay. So, and he never encountered European Jews before. So when he started to encounter these people, he started to draw comparisons to what his own indigenous culture was and to that of European Jews. All right, go ahead.
Our government was conducted by our chiefs or judges, our wise men and elders. And the head of a family with us enjoyed a similar authority over his household with that which is ascribed to Abraham and the other patriarchs.
So his government, his family structure was similar to what he saw in the scriptures and to Jews that he encountered. All right, go ahead.
The law of retaliation obtained almost universally with us as with them.
All right, so he had the similar law of retaliation that the Jews had that we had, right? Eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth. Go ahead.
For we had our circumcision.
He had circumcision. Go ahead.
As a rule, I believe, peculiar to that people. We had also our sacrifices and burnt offerings.
So they had sacrifices and burnt offerings too. All right, go ahead.
Our washings and purifications on the same occasions as they had.
So he's like, there's a lot of similarities here. You know, I don't know if it ever clicked for him. It might have, but there's a reason for those similarities, right? Now, Equiano also gives his testimony of being led away captive through the interior of West Africa, which is known as Negro land, to the coastal shores. And this is very important. Let's read that.
All the nations and people I had hitherto passed through resembled our own in their manners, customs, and languages.
So a lot of the people that he came across while he was being carried through the interiors of West Africa, they resembled him, right? So they weren't Europeans. They were other dark-skinned, melanated people, all right? And they had similar manners, similar customs, similar language, right? He was probably seeing Israelites. Go ahead.
But I came at length to a country, the inhabitants of which differed from us in all those particulars.
So he came to a part of the country where the people looked like him, but they were different in their mannerisms and everything, right? Go ahead.
I was very much struck with this difference.
He was surprised. Come on.
Especially when I came among a people who did not circumcise.
So he came amongst a dark-skinned people who didn't circumcise, right? Go ahead.
And ate without washing their hands.
Come on.
They cooked also in iron pots and had European cutlasses.
Say that again. What did they have?
They cooked also in iron pots.
Come on.
And had European cutlasses.
And what else?
And crossbows.
And crossbows. So these dark-skinned people had European weapons. Okay? And they were different from his people. They didn't practice the same customs that we can find in the Torah. Right? Keep going.
Which were unknown to us, and fought with their fists amongst themselves.
So there was always a lot of strife between them, right? Go ahead.
Their women were not so modest as ours, for they ate and drank and slept with their men.
So when you read in the Torah, it tells you that there are times of the month where men and women had to sleep separately, right? You had your own quarters for your wife. Go ahead.
But above all, I was amazed to see no sacrifices or offerings amongst them.
So they didn't sacrifice as they did. Come on.
In some of those places, the people ornamented themselves with scars, and likewise filed their teeth very sharp.
So Why would he be surprised that they ornamented themselves with scars? Because according to the Levitical law, you can't cut or make any prints into your skin. Okay, so he came across indigenous Africans, right? And he was captured by them. They were given European weapons to help further the case of the transatlantic slave trade. All right, so this is a book called The Igbos, Amazing Facts and Revelations by Professor O. Alazi, and he gave this testimony, the Igbos of West Africa. If you can read that.
The discovery of the Hebrew writing on the floor of the ancient palace of Eri in Aguilera by a combined research team from Israel and Nigeria, led by the author, a writing that existed hundreds of years before the arrival of white men in Nigeria.
So they found Hebrew writing in a palace, right, that was basically due to their ancestors being of Hebrew origin, of stock, right? Go ahead.
The archaeological British finding at Agulu in about 1917, 500 feet below the soil, of a Star of David in solid bronze, indicative of a people that might have migrated from the ancient city of King David.
So they found a Star of David there. Come on.
The vast, overwhelming evidence of cultural similarities.
That's right. Come on.
That over 85% of the names of all Igbo towns and villages are Hebrew.
So check that out. And he's actually Igbo, right? So over 85% of the names of Igbo towns and villages are of Hebrew origin, right? And up here we just have a picture of a Igbo synagogue and some Igbos practicing the faith. And here CNN wrote an article called Nigeria Igbo Jews, Lost Tribes of Israel, right? But we know they're not lost, right? They found out. So 19th century account of Jews. Now, Mungo Park lived in 1771 to 1806. He was a scholarly explorer of the African continent. And here in the lower right-hand corner is the route that he took. He's credited as being the first European to travel as far east to the Niger River, right? And he wrote of the Jews operating in the region of Timbuktu. He said, there are many Jews at Timbuktu, and they spoke Arabic and used the same prayers as the Moors. So they started to, he made a distinction between Moors and Jews, and the fact that they started practicing Islam. All right. Now he wrote this book on the left-hand side, you see, called The Travels in the Interior of Africa. And he wrote something in it that's pretty profound. Kenny, if you can read that.
I discovered that the Negroes are in possession of an Arabic version of the Pentateuch of Moses.
So on his travel, he came across some Negroes, some brothers that had the Torah. All right, keep going.
Which they call Toreta la Musa. This is so highly esteemed that it is often sold for the value of one prime slave.
So the Torah was in such high esteem that you had to pay the price of a slave to obtain one, right? Keep going.
They have likewise a version of the Psalms of David.
They have the Psalms of David, right? Keep going.
And lastly, the book of Isaiah.
The book of Isaiah. Come on.
Which they call Lingili Laisa. And it is in very high esteem.
And is in very high esteem. So I know, and this is probably a similar account for you all as well, that we were always told that we got the Bible after we landed here through the transatlantic slave trade, right? That we didn't know about this stuff until the Europeans gave it to us. But this is a historical account, firsthand source, that we had possession of the records. All right, keep reading.
The account of our first parents,
Come on.
the death of Abel,
They knew about the death of Abel. Come on.
the deluge, the lives of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob,
Come on.
the story of Joseph and his brethren, the history of Moses, David, Solomon, etc.
They had all of that. Go ahead.
All these have been related to me in the Mandingo language.
So they spoke this in the Mandingo language, right? He had a translator. Come on.
with tolerable exactness by different people.
Come on.
In my surprise,
Notice he says, my surprise, right? Go ahead.
in my surprise was not greater on hearing these accounts from the lips of the Negroes.
So he's like, wait a minute. How did these brothers know this? Right? Keep going.
than theirs on finding that I was already acquainted with them.
So we have a situation here where the brothers, the Negroes are sitting there like, how do you know this? And Mungo Park is looking at them like, how do you know this? Right? So it's easy to understand why we knew it, because we carried these records with us from the East. All right? So 20th century, and I'm going to read this. Robert Sutherland Rattray was an author and expert on West African studies, and he specialized on the Ashanti tribe. And he wrote this book here called The Religion and Art in Ashanti. And he was convinced after intense studies that the Ashanti were of Hebrew Israelite stock due to the striking similarities to Hebraic or Hebrew linguistic, cultural, and religious practices. And Joseph J. Williams wrote Hebrewisms in West Africa, providing extensive proof of the Hebrew origins of Ashanti culture. Now, what you'll find is that when you start doing a lot of research, you run into some challenges. One of them is the books become very rare, right? This book, Religion and Art in Ashanti, if you can find it for less than a few $1,000s, let me know. And then also they start to revise things out of the book in later editions. So sometimes you even have to go to editions that were translated in other languages and earlier to get what actually was spoken of. But this is out of Hebrewisms of West Africa. If you can read that quote, Ken.
The termination T or tie in the names of West African tribes has usually the governing meaning of the race of, the men of, the children of.
So the word T at the end of Ashanti means the men of, or the people of, right? Go ahead.
This would make Ashanti the people of Ashan. There was, as a fact, a town of the name of Ashan in the domain of Judah.
Right. So in the domain of Judah, you always had the priests that were on the suburbs or the outskirts, right? And there was a town or a suburb called Ashan, and we'll read that quickly. In 1 Chronicles chapter 6, verse 57.
1 Chronicles chapter 6, verse 57. And to the sons of Aaron, they gave the cities of Judah, namely Hebron, the city of refuge.
Now the sons of Aaron, meaning the Levites, right, who were given the charge of the priesthood. Go ahead.
And Libnah with her suburbs, and Jatir, and Eshtemoa with their suburbs, and Helon with her suburbs, Debir with her suburbs, and Ashan.
And Ashan, come on.
With her suburbs.
With her suburbs. So according to the scriptures, Ashan was a suburb of Judah, right? So could it be that the Ashanti, the men of Ashan, were actually Levites? We know that they were the children of Israel. Now, here on the upper right-hand corner was a graphical depiction by Joseph J. Williams. He saw a Hebrew priest and an Ashanti priest, and around his neck he had what appeared to be an ephod that the Levitical priests wore. All right. Coincidence? Probably not. All right. The 20th century. This is Dr. Alan H. Goodby, who was a prolific author and member of the faculty of the School of Religion at Duke University. All right, now, he wrote a book called The Lost Tribes, a Myth. And this book now, I think, is going for about $2,000. All right, Brother Kenny, if you can read that quote from the book.
Hundreds of thousands of slaves were brought to America from Western Africa during the days of the traffic, beginning nearly 400 years ago. The author also shares how much more of Judaism survived among West African Negroes in that earlier time.
So it was a known fact that the Negroes that they pulled from the West or captured from the West Coast of Africa, they were practicing Judaism. So he's asking the question, how much more of that religion survived through slavery? All right, go ahead.
As persecuted communities, they were rather more in danger than other Negroes of being raided by war parties and sold as slaves.
So there were the Jews, or what I'm going to say the Jews, but the Negroes who were living in West Coast of Africa were practicing Judaism. They were more prone to being captured by the indigenous Africans and sold into slavery. All right, keep going.
It may be considered certain that many partial Judaized Negroes were among the slaves in America.
Come on.
Emphasis added, how many of them might still hold some Jewish customs here, Salakia, how many of them might still hold some Jewish customs here is another question.
Right, and what started happening once slavery was abolished, a lot of our people started coming back to their roots of Judaism. Right, so we have Rabbi Matthews here. We have some rabbis in Harlem during the earliest 20th century. This was something that was very natural for our people. All right. Okay. Right. The slave trades. Deuteronomy chapter 28, verse 68.
This is the book of Deuteronomy chapter 28, verse 68.
Come on.
And the Lord shall bring thee into Egypt again with ships.
So it says, bring thee into Egypt again. So we know the land was not originally called Egypt. It was actually given to Ham's son, Mizraim. All right. And even chematologists would tell you that it was called Kemet, which is a derivation of the word Ham, right, in Hebrew. So he said that, let's define what Egypt means. Let's jump to Exodus chapter 20, verse 2.
I am the Most High thy power, which have brought thee out of the land of Egypt.
Out of the land of Egypt.
Out of the house of bondage.
Out of the house of bondage. So let's jump back to verse 28. So Egypt means the house of bondage.
By the way whereof I spake unto thee, thou shalt see it no more again. And there ye shall be sold unto your enemies for bondmen and bondwomen, and no man shall buy you.
So the prophecy here was that we will be sold into bondage again via ships, right? And sold to your enemy as slave men and slave women. And when it says buy is old Quaker English for save, right? So no man shall save you. All right, read that, Luke 21.
This is the book of Luke, chapter 21, verse 23. But woe unto them that are with child, and to them that give suck in those days, for there shall be great distress in the land, and wrath upon this people. Verse 24. And they shall fall by the edge of the sword.
So Christ is prophesying to the Israelites at that time. He said, they shall fall by the edge of the sword. Come on.
And shall be led away captive.
Led away captive, meaning slaves. Come on.
Into all nations.
All nations. Come on.
And Jerusalem shall be trodden down of the Gentiles until the times of the Gentiles be fulfilled.
And we know we're still living in the times of the Gentiles, which could only mean there are Gentiles in the land of Israel today. Let's read Jeremiah 17, verse 4.
And thou, even thyself, shalt discontinue from thine heritage that I gave thee.
So it was prophecy that the Jews would lose their heritage, right? Come on.
And I will cause thee to serve thine enemies in a land which thou knowest not.
So you will be sold as slaves via ships, and you will be serving in a land that you never knew, right? Come on.
For ye have kindled a fire in mine anger, which shall burn forever.
Which shall burn forever. Deuteronomy 28, verse 64.
And the Lord shall scatter thee among all people, from one end of the earth even unto the other. And there thou shalt serve other gods.
You shall serve other gods, come on.
Which neither thou nor thy fathers have known, even wood and stone.
So the prophecy here is that we will be scattered throughout the four corners of the earth, right? That we will be, the clues here is that it will be via slavery, slave trades, right? So here we have the transatlantic slave trade, which was from the 15th to the 19th century. We have the trans-Sahara slave trade led by the Arab Muslims from the 8th century to the 17th century. We have the Indian Ocean slave trade, which was from the 2nd century to the 20th century. And lastly, the Mediterranean slave trade from the 17th century to the 19th century. So this is how Deuteronomy 28:64 was fulfilled. Through slavery, we were scattered through the four corners of the earth. All right. Now, we spoke about the Butler Island plantation. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this. You can read about him, Pierce Butler. He was one of the richest men in America, one of the signers of the Declaration of Independence. And he had a preference for slaves, that of Igbo, Ashanti, and Yoruba origin. All right. Now, Deuteronomy chapter 28. We're going to start at verse 15.
This is the book of Deuteronomy chapter 28, verse 15. But it shall come to pass, if thou wilt not hearken unto the voice of the Lord thy God, to observe to do all his commandments and his statutes, which I command thee this day, that all these curses shall come upon thee and overtake thee.
So he was telling the Israelites at that time, and as a record for them, that if you don't keep my commandments, these curses are going to overcome you, right? Verse 16.
Cursed shalt thou be in the city, and cursed shalt thou be in the field.
And the Butler Island plantation, it was a rice plantation. And from the accounts of the people who were there and some of the descendants, the rice plantations were the worst plantations to work on due to the amount of physical labor. It was so horrific, the accounts that you can read. And I have a book that I'm going to touch on a little bit called The Journal of a Resident on a Georgian Plantation by Fanny Kimball. And she married Pierce Butler Jr., who was heir to the whole Butler empire, if you want to call it that, in Georgia. And she was married to him in Philadelphia. She didn't know that how he had gained his wealth. So when she moved to Georgia and lived with him on the plantation for a year, she was horrified. So she wrote letters that she didn't send to anyone, but she wrote accounts of what she saw on the plantation. And I encourage you, if you're interested in any of this history, this book is like reading Deuteronomy 28. Some of the accounts, it's unbelievable. All right, so verse 23.
And thy heaven that is over thy head shall be brass, and the earth that is under thee shall be iron.
So this is a prison, right? Your head over you should be brass, and the earth under you should be iron, right? Come on.
Verse 30. Thou shalt betroth a wife, and another man shall lie with her.
And another man shall lie with her. So this man here Roswell King worked on the Butler Island plantation, he fathered over 60 children with the slaves that he was overseeing. All right. And we know that was done by force. Keep going.
Thou shalt build a house, and thou shalt not dwell therein.
So it says, you shall build a house. To the right was the house that the slaves built for Roswell King. Looks like a mansion, right? Pretty nice. Not one slave was able to live in it, right? That's a curse. Keep going.
Thou shalt plant a vineyard, and shalt not gather the grapes thereof.
Now, to the bottom right, I have one of the slave quarters that the slaves lived in, right? That shack. And I just want to read this account in Fanny Kimball's book. It says, now this man is talking about one of the overseers. It says, now this man is known to be a hard master. His Negro houses are sheds, not fit to stable beasts in. His slaves are ragged, half naked, and miserable. So this is some of the conditions that were a result of breaking the commandments that we had to contend with and deal with. All right, verse 33.
The fruit of thy land and all thy labors shall a nation which thou knowest not eat up, and thou shalt be only oppressed and crushed always.
All right, so did the slaves reap any of the benefits of their hard work? Absolutely not, right? So we were oppressed, we were crushed, right? Let's keep going. Verse 41.
Thou shalt beget sons and daughters, but thou shalt not enjoy them, for they shall go into captivity.
For our sons and daughters shall go into captivity. So we can easily visualize this as children were captured from the shores of West Africa. But I want to read this personal account by Fanny Kimball. And it says, again, I find many women who have borne from 5 to 10 children rated as workers, precisely as young women in the prime of their strength who have had none. So they will always rank the workers, right? If you had, a lot of children, or if you didn't, you would still put the work the same way. And I'm gonna jump down. It says, in short, as their lives are for the most part those of mere animals, their increase, talking about the children, their increase is literally mere animal breeding, to which every encouragement is given, because they breeded the slaves. For it adds to the master's livestock and the value of his estate. So it tells us that our children would go into captivity. We would not enjoy our children, because they became, after they were bred and raised up to a certain age, they were added into the overseers or the owner's assets. They became slaves. All right, verse 46. I promise we're going to end this on a good note. Keep going, verse 46.
And they shall be upon thee for a sign and a wonder.
So these curses will be onto us for a sign and a wonder. A sign for us to identify who we are according to the scriptures, and a wonder because we're always going to wonder, why are we going through all this? Why are we going through all this tribulation in America and out of America? It was prophesied in the scriptures, all right? Come on. And upon thy seed forever, right? Go ahead.
Verse 48. Therefore thou shalt serve thine enemies, which the Lord shall send against thee, in hunger and in thirst.
We will serve our enemies, right? In hunger and in thirst. Come on.
And in nakedness.
And in nakedness.
And in want of all things.
In want of all things. Come on.
And he shall put a yoke of iron upon thy neck.
That yoke of iron in the right hand, left hand corner, all right, of the pictures.
Until he have destroyed thee.
Until he have destroyed thee. Now I'm going to read this out of this book again. Now, she was given an account of slaves. Whenever they saw her, they were running up on her and saying, asking her for things, right? And it says, these demonstrations of regard were followed up by piteous complaints of hunger and rheumatism. Rheumatism is like back pains and such that you would get from working in the slave fields, right? And it says, and their requests for pittances of food and clothing, to which we responded by promises of additions in both kinds. So the slaves would always see the owners, the overseers, and run up on them and ask them for food, for clothing, for just basic necessities, right? Which was a reflection of the curse that we just read, verse 48. All right, next verse.
Verse 65. And among these nations shalt thou find no ease.
No ease, no rest, right? Work continuously for no pay. Keep going.
Neither shall the sole of thy foot have rest.
Come on.
But the Lord shall give thee there a trembling heart,
A trembling heart. Come on.
a failing of eyes, and sorrow of mind.
And sorrow of mind, right? And a lot of our ancestors, they sang niggle spirituals, things that were uplifting, right? Because they were always thinking about Zion and getting back home and getting saved out of this curse, right? Verse 66.
And thy life shall hang in doubt before thee,
Come on.
and thou shalt fear day and night, and shall have none assurance of thy life.
So this was a reflection of that time where you didn't know if you were going to live the next day, if you were going to wake up, right? And we fast forward to the day, we look at our people living in the slums and the ghettos and so on and so forth. You don't know if you're going to make it. You don't know if your downfall can come at the hand of police or your own brother, right? But we know that this is a curse that will place on our people. All right, a change is going to come, right? Let's read Jeremiah chapter 30.
This is the book of Jeremiah, chapter 30, verse 4.
Come on.
In these of the words that the Lord spake concerning Israel and concerning Judah.
So who was the Most High speaking to? Israel and Judah, right? Come on.
Verse 8. For it shall come to pass in that day, saith the Lord of hosts, that I will break his yoke from off thy neck.
So the Most High says that he will break the yoke off our neck. Come on.
And will burst thy bonds.
And burst thy bonds, right? No more debt, no more taxes, no more servitude, right? Who's waiting for this day? Everybody? All right. Come on.
And strangers shall no more serve themselves of him.
So when this happened, we would no longer serve the Gentile nations. No more, right? Keep going.
Verse 9. But they shall serve the Lord their God.
We will only serve the Most High. That was our charge from the beginning. That's why we weren't supposed to serve the other nations. We were supposed to serve him and teach the other nations how to serve the Most High in spirit and in truth. Right? Come on.
And David their king,
which is Christ,
whom I will raise up unto them. Verse 10. Therefore fear thou not, O my servant Jacob.
Come on.
Saith the Lord. Neither be dismayed, O Israel. For lo, I will save thee from afar.
He will save us from afar. Come on.
And thy seed from the land of their captivity.
Our seed from the land of our captivities. Come on.
And Jacob shall return, and shall be in rest, and be quiet, and none shall make him afraid.
Come on. Verse 11.
For I am with thee, saith the Lord, to save thee, though I make a full end of all the nations.
So he's going to put an end to all the nations that we had to serve for the past millennium and plus, right? Come on.
Whither I have scattered thee.
Wherever he scattered us, right? Through the numerous slave trades, right? Come on.
Yet I will not make a full end of thee.
Come on.
But I will correct thee in measure.
Come on.
And will not leave thee altogether unpunished.
Right. So that remnant that's going to return back to the land, that's going to return back to the Most High, that's going to be the end of our captivity, right? Kingdom come. So that's the end of the presentation. Thank you.
Oh, Jerusalem, let my right hand forget its cunning. If I forget thee, oh Jerusalem, let my tongue cling to the roof of my mouth. If I forsake thee, oh Mount Zion, woe be unto my soul. If I forget Jerusalem, chief of my joy.